If you have a classic car or plan to do wiring on your own car, listen up. In this video, I'm going to take you through the 14 wiring mistakes I see day in and day out. If you get it wrong, you'll kill your battery, get stuck stranded, or burn your car to the ground. So this is a perfect classic fail right here where a car's not wired right. My battery just went dead on this GTO. So come look at what happened. As soon as I hooked up the battery, my reverse lights are on. Reverse lights are supposed to be wired to a switched power, right? Anytime this car's in reverse, even with the key off, the lights stay on. What I'm getting at is you need to have things wired properly to the proper switched power and constant power. In this case, we have reverse lights that are wired through a modern transmission to a constant power, so anytime it's in reverse, those lights are going to stay on. If you get a stereo or any other type of auxiliary accessory and you wire it so that it's to constant power, it'll stay on even when the key is off. Make sure that you wire to a switched power so that it turns on only when the key is on. Be sure you use switched power and constant power properly so you make sure you don't drain your battery. You'll have the best results in this case. One of the most common problems I see with classic cars will be taillight issues. You'll get one light not working, a light that's going dim and bright, not in relation to the other. And almost every time you get something like that, it has to do with a poorly fitting socket or a bad ground. Most of these early cars use the taillight housing to get a good ground. This is a generic aftermarket one, but it just simply has two wires, tail, turn being brake as well. What happens is if this socket wiggles around, it's not making a positive ground, so the light tends to cut out. So a simple upgrade there is when you buy a new socket, you can replace it and add one with a dedicated ground. That way, even when the socket's unplugged, it'll still work. So if you see, for example, in my Camaro, even right now, even though it's unplugged, it's still working. I'm no longer relying on this old housing and everything else to provide a ground. The socket itself will be the ground. Also, a lot of the times I'll see people when they wire in their sockets, their turn will be dim and their tail lights will be bright. If that's not a ground issue, it's almost always because when somebody wired in the socket, they hooked the tail to turn and the turn to tail. So if you flip the connections the opposite way, you might find that the bulb is going to flash in a proper brightness. So if your bulb doesn't seem to flash in a proper brightness, you can definitely check your connections, check and make sure your bulb is installed properly. Most of these bulbs are designed to go in one way. You got a short and a long. It shouldn't fit in one way, it should fit in the other. Make sure you've got good tail light sockets wired properly, and you should have lights that last and don't cause you any problems and don't make you get pulled over. Another tip regarding tail lights, turn signals, and the like is so many people nowadays are switching to an LED type bulb, which is great. They're brighter, they take less power to run, they create less heat. They're phenomenal for like a dome light bulb. But in any effect, a lot of the times when you run these LED lights, you're gonna get a light that won't flash. It's just gonna sit on and not blink, or it'll blink too slow. So instead of a regular flasher that simply is a two-prong flasher, a lot of these LEDs are going to require a specific LED design flasher or what we call a no-load flasher. A no-load flasher plugs right into your fuse box or your connector just like a factory one with two prongs, but it's got a dedicated ground to help carry the load. Make sure you have the right flasher in there if you're running LED lights so you don't have any problems. Much like tail lights, headlights often are problematic too. So many of the problems at the headlights on these cars is either the connection at the headlight or a bad ground. Check the connection, clean it, lube it, and then check your ground. So many of these cars have been taken apart, rewired, repainted, something of that nature. Make sure you clean your ground surface, so anytime you screw and attach your ground down, make sure it's contacting metal. You got a screw that's locking down tight, and hopefully you'll have headlights that stay strong and bright. Most of our old school fuse boxes just don't have enough circuit points for us to run all of the electronics we need. So people over the years stack more and more power in here. This one's had power added, daisy chained to another, to a second wire coming off of it. The fuse box is just overloaded. So what you want to do, if you're not going to upgrade to a modern harness that has more fuses and higher capacity in terms of overall circuits, what you can do is any of your additional things, if you're going to run air ride, if you're going to run fuel injection, an electric fuel pump, whatever it might be, make sure that you use some kind of a relay and wire in through a traditional relay or a more modern relay. That way what you can do is you can wire it straight to the battery to give power supply to the relay, and then all you're asking the fuse box to do is provide switched power. So when you turn the key on, it gets power through here directly from the battery. Don't try to run every accessory under the sun through the stock fuse box. They were meant to run like a few things: headlights, ignition, heater, that's it. So understand the limitations of a fuse box. Run an auxiliary fuse box or some kind of relay system on any major draw accessories that you're going to use. This Camaro obviously has the engine out of it, but with the engine out of the way, it gives me a good chance to show you one of the other major issues that is a huge miss that people fail on is properly grounding their chassis, their engine, their fenders, their body, everything. Everything needs to be grounded as much as possible in a loop, if you will. You should have your ground, should go from your battery straight to the engine block with a nice clean connection. You should also have another ground coming off and going to the body. So you want to ground the engine, you want to ground the body, you also want to ground the frame. So normally what I'll do is I'll run a ground from the engine to the battery, from the battery to the frame, and from the frame to the fender or another body panel. Never underestimate how many problems can arise from not having adequate grounding. One of the biggest mistakes you're going to see with wiring is you're going to see people overload the battery terminals with too many wires. This car's got wire, wire, wire. I understand some of these cars have modern technology, right? Electric fans, air conditioning, various relays for different things. But to me, that's a no-no. This guy's overloaded. If it cracks, it's a fight anytime you take it apart. Terminal might get stressed and cracked. It's just very hard to work with. Plus, it's not very sightly. So a solution when you have a stacked battery terminal like that is you can actually run a positive wire, or a negative for that matter, to where you need to, and put it somewhere more discreet so it'll look a little cleaner. And then what you can do is any electrical components you need to add for constant power, you can just stack them on top of that terminal. That way they're all bolted nice and safe, out of the way, and then anytime you're fiddling with the battery, you're not going to have to fight them. Not to mention, it's going to look a lot cleaner. Every car should have some kind of a fusible link or a dedicated fuse on all the power supply coming off of the battery. So you're probably going to have a positive going straight to the starter for the starter, but all of your accessories that drive the car should be fused or on some type of a fusible link. A lot of the aftermarket harnesses, painless wiring, American Auto Wire, all the big names got smart lately. What they're doing is they're coming with a fuse. So what you'll do is you'll run your power from your battery into a fuse, and then all of your accessories are going to come out of the opposite end of what we call a mega fuse. In this case, this is 175 amp. What that does is separates the car from the battery in case of a major electrical overload. Short something out, have a fire, it's going to pop the fuse and basically shut down the electrical system inside the car. Make sure you have a fusible link or some kind of a fuse setup on your power supply so you don't burn down your car. Looking under the hood of this Pontiac Catalina, I see a few things that I want to point out to you. One, they've got two black battery cables. Luckily, they put a positive sign on here, but imagine if you had two black cables. What is positive? What is negative? Be sure that you're helping yourself and whoever might need to work on the car in the future. If you're going to run a black battery cable as a positive, maybe at least put like a red shrink wrap on here. Do a positive sign. They even do little washers. Trust me, it's going to help you in the future. If you ever have to jump this car or you're working on it and you switch the cables around, you're going to fry your points, your ignition. So anytime you can, run a red positive, a black negative, or label the terminals. It sounds simple, but trust me, it'll save you in a jam. Also on this Pontiac, I see a few things that come to mind. The way this alternator is wired, this wire is bare and barely in here. That is about the lamest crimp and spade I've ever seen. This butt splice connector, I hope the alternator stays charging. Also, one of the biggest pet peeves I have and that you should try to avoid when you're working on your own car is try to resist using every single hole that's already existing in the firewall as a pass-through. It seems like every car that comes in and out of the shop has some kind of a power wire or a ground wire or signal wire run through the clutch hole, the speedometer hole, or even like a stereo that's going through sheet metal with no kind of a grommet and no insulation to protect it. Make sure your wires are routed free and clear of moving components. Be thoughtful as to how you route wiring when you're doing your car. Get things out of the way. Run things through their own dedicated holes. Feel free to drill a hole in your car if you need to and can do it cleanly. I understand if your car is 100% stock and you're going to run one wire through gently and cleanly, but it just seems all of these cars have wires put through like spaghetti noodles every which way. Per the example on that Pontiac where it had the awful wiring connections at the alternator and all around, you really want to make sure that you're using the proper style connectors anytime you can. I like to do one of two things if I can. Generally speaking, if I'm going to butt splice a wire, I'm going to strip it cleanly, and I like to use an insulated connector. So that way when I've got my connector on there and I do a nice crimp on it, it's going to be protected, no bare wire showing. Also, make sure you use a good crimper. Get a good positive crimp on that wire. Give it a tug test. You shouldn't be able to pull it off. Another option, if you're not going to use a traditional insulated type butt connector, what we'll do a lot of times is we'll get these bare connectors. What's nice about these is you can strip your wire and then insert it in and actually see that you're getting a good crimp and a good connection. Word of wisdom, make sure you put your heat shrink on there first. Otherwise, you're going to be cutting the wire, right? Because you're going to not be able to get it back on afterwards. Get a good quality tool. Get a good quality crimp. Give it a test. It's nice and tight. Slide your heat shrink over. Get a lighter or a torch in this case. Simply heat and shrink. But what's wrong with this? I was using this as an example, and it actually leads to another example. Notice that I used a green wire with a red wire. That is a total no-no. Anytime you can, if you're going to hook a red wire up and use it for positive, a pink wire normally is going to be switched power. A green wire like this might be, a signal or some other wire, temp sending unit if you're a GM guy. Anyways, whatever you're doing, try to use the same color wire if you're wiring your car. It's so often that you'll get in and somebody will just take some wire that they've got, maybe some speaker wire, and extend a wire from A to B to C. So if I'm trying to follow a wire and it changes color, you're lost. You're never going to figure out what was happening, what was done, why it was done. So try to follow the rules of a little bit of common courtesy, which is try to use the same color wire all the way through. That reminds me of an example. I had a 66 Chevelle convertible came in one time and they had a whole new harness. All the wires were labeled really, really small. They were all black. What a freaking nightmare that car was to wire. Never do it again. All the new harnesses come with the proper colors, blues and greens and tans and reds and pinks. They're laid out in a color schematic so you can follow. It's going to make it easier for you as you wire it. It's going to make it easier if anybody ever has to work on the car, and it's going to make diagnostics a breeze. Even though we've decided if we use good connectors and make good solid connections, we should be okay, a lot of the times we're going to get wires that plug in together, and we're relying on that connection for a current flow. A lot of times that's going to be inadequate for high amperage. What I see a lot of the time on fuel pumps, fan relays, etc., is I'll see the wire start to short out and darken like it's burning up. So anytime I can, I like to do the following. You will usually use what are called weather pack connectors. A pair of matched connectors is phenomenal. So what this one does is you can wire in your ends into it, and then when you're done, you simply can plug the wires together like factory. Then when you want to, you can simply disconnect and connect. Especially if you're doing things that may have a tendency to get unplugged ever. We do it with our gas tank, so if you have to drop the tank, okay, no big deal. Boom, I'm good. A regular homemade connection might do the trick, but anytime you can do nice connections, it's worth the effort. Wiring is so important, it's so fundamental to your car. Another thing I see all the time is you get like an ignition switch or a wiper switch, and people will just stack a bunch of spades onto it. So then you just have all these wires coming off, ideally in the right order, but if you're the Porsche Mo that ever has to work on the car later, or it's your own car, it's a pain because they're going to fall off, they're not positive locking, it's going to cause you problems later. So anytime you can, get the right connector that's going to actually fit on your switch properly, slide in the right terminals and lock them down. There's something to be said for having the right terminal that fits on the right part. It's going to result in a lot less problems and a heck of a lot more reliability. Here's a simple but effective tip that I learned personally. So often these cars had a factory lighter that you would push in and it would stay in, and then ideally it would pop out once the element got hot. I've seen a few cars over the years come in where somebody pushed in the lighter and it didn't pop out. Usually it's attributable to a kid hopping in the car. You know, you got kids, they're in there trying to turn the signals. They push it in, it doesn't pop out. In this case, I guess you have a few options. One, which you can simply do, is disconnect the lighter so it doesn't work at all. Then you don't have a lighter, which nowadays we often want that lighter port to charge our phone or run some type of accessory. Another option is to switch this and run it to a switched power instead of a constant power, so it's only on when the car is in the on position, right? Perhaps run it through a relay like we talked about. But what I usually do, because I don't smoke and smoking isn't that common anymore, is I will usually take the lighter element out of the lighter, and then when I have it in the car, it plugs right in and stays in. It looks like a lighter, pops out, can function as a lighter for charging your phone or another electrical device, but you don't have the fire hazard. Simple tip, but it's worth it. Speaking of burning your car down or having electrical issues, another very important tip, don't underestimate it, is have fuses on anything and everything that you can. If you're gonna run a lot of power through stuff, it could be your whole car. We talked about the big fuses that they do oftentimes. They make what's called a maxi fuse, which is pretty much a maximum fuse, right? So these are great for running your whole car off of, or any heavy duty accessories. If you're gonna run other heavy duty accessories, sometimes stereo, convertible tops or the like, what you'll do is you can use a circuit breaker. This circuit breaker, when it pops, is gonna pop open like that. Instead of blowing a fuse, it'll set, and then you can pop it closed and reset. That sure is a lot better than a wire melting. A more generic version of the same is a factory type circuit breaker. A lot of times you would see these on power windows or power tops, like I said. What happens is the power comes out, goes through here and back out. If you're running that top up or those windows down and the fuse pops, you give it about 5 or 10 seconds, it'll reset and go. That way you're not stuck stranded on the side of the road, you're not stuck with your window down or up. They're just a great alternative to wiring direct. Keep in mind fuses, circuit breakers, anything you can use, fusible links, protect your car from any possible short circuits. Following this advice is going to help make sure you don't have any major problems. A simple wire pinch, or if an electronic device shorts out, you don't want it to take out the whole car.